Hey everyone, Symphony Future here, and today in TouchDesigner we are going to talk a little bit about logic, a little bit about Python, and a little bit about if statements primarily. Now I want to make sure that this is a crash course and a very basic course. I'm in no way a code monkey or Python expert. But this is basically the stuff I discovered through a lot of trial and error. And I found it really hard to find this information. So hopefully me spreading this information will help you out. And hopefully it will trigger some members of the community to comment down below if there are better ways to do certain things. I'm going to talk a little bit about expressions. And later on we're going to talk a little bit about scripts and some of the potential uses. So let's not waste any more time and let's just start off at the top of our project with the simple gate. Now for me, a simple gate is something that opens or closes depending on the input. In this case, we have a constant going in to an expression and we have the output as a null. So this expression is very straightforward, although it is written a little bit like Yoda speak. So what this expression says is the value is 1 if the input operator constant 1, the first channel, which is called channel 0, is 0. In every other situation, the value of the output is 0. So if we change the value of this channel, so let's move it up. Now the input is no longer 0, so it will now immediately shut off the output. And once the value is 0 again, it will activate the gate. Of course, you can change this expression. It can also be bigger than 0. So now if it goes above 0, it will change. And you can also change it the other way around. So let's change it a little bit. And now our cutoff is at 0.5. You can also use equals. If you want to make it greater or equals, you just put an is behind it. So now if we make it exactly 0.5, it will be on, off, and on. And you could do it the other way around as well, in which case you change the first character to smaller than. And now if we change the input, and this is basically the easiest little if statement you can use. So that's our first example. So you set the output followed by the condition. And the result of what will happen if this condition is not met. Now we can make this a little bit more complicated by using a comparator. Now in this comparator example, we have two constants going into the expression. The second constant is our threshold. And if constant 1 exceeds the threshold, it will output the first constant. And when it dips below the threshold, it will turn off. So this is kind of your classic gate where you have a threshold and a signal that can either exceed or be below the threshold. Could be good for a noise gate and stuff like that. Works pretty simple. Now we say the output is 0 if constant 2, that's this constant here, the first channel, once again that's channel 0, is greater than or smaller than or equals the threshold 1, 0 channel. So this is threshold 1, operator threshold 1, and that's the 0 channel. If this condition is not met, output the operator constant first channel. So that's this channel. So now instead of outputting a 1 or a 0, we're actually outputting the value of the channel. It's a very simple, very useful little script. And this will basically cook with every frame update. So it's not the cheapest way to do things, but it's definitely efficient. You can also use something like this to switch channels. So let's move down. And now we're going into MIDI. So what do we have going here? I have a MIDI input, and for this I will have to activate my camera. There we go. So I have a MIDI input here, which I have mapped, and this is button 1. Let's see what the expression said. The output is operator constant 0. That's our first thing. If the MIDI controller channel 0, so that's our button, is 0. So if I don't press the button, it's 0. It will not output anything other than constant 5. In all other situations, we will output the LFO. So in this case, if I press and hold the button, it will output the LFO. And if I let go of the button, it will output the constant. So in this situation, you can hold the button and it will display the LFO. And if we let go of the button, it will show the constant. And we can change this, of course. And it will change accordingly. If we press the button, it will go back to the LFO. And if you had a toggle button, you can make this toggleable, of course. But this is a press and hold type of button. It's a very simple expression. Once again, it's what happens if the condition is true and what happens in every other situation. And you can call to any operator with the op, opening bracket, and between single quotes, the name of the operator, followed by the channel. So this is all using expressions, and you can make any variation of this. So that's our simple gate, our gate comparator, which compares two values to each other, and our switch to switch between two inputs. This, of course, could also be done with a switch operator, although in some situations this is the better option, in my opinion. Now we're moving into Python territory. And what we have here is a sample and hold. Now, if you're familiar with synthesizers, you will probably be familiar with this. Once again, we have a MIDI map in, a script, and a constant. And we have an LFO here. And if I press the button, it will take the value of the LFO and put it into the constant. If you press the button really fast, there you go. Works pretty well. Now this requires a little bit more work because we're now using Python. And if you load in the script, it will have a bunch of these parameters, but not all parameters. So let me just quickly show the script. There we go. So by default, it will look like this. Just move this over a little bit. And if you want to edit it, you can simply click the little viewer active button here. And now we can just type things into the script. It's pretty simple. Hey, future me here. So a quick side note that is very important that I failed to mention is that Python is very sensitive to indentation. So make sure that all your code is properly indented or Python will just straight out refuse to run it, because that's what Python is like. It's a little bit evil like that. So check your indentations, and if you're in any doubts, check out the way I wrote it down in the code block and it should work for you. All right, let's carry on. So the way I have this set up is with a little pulse button right here. And this pulse button is activated with the MIDI button. So that's just a matter of putting this into viewer mode and dragging it on there. Job reference, that's that. But when you first load your script, you will not see a pulse button. So we actually have to use the script to make a pulse button. And to do this, we need this command here. Page.append pulse with a capital P, opening bracket, single quote, and then the name of the button. I chose to simply call it pulse, single quote, and a closing bracket. So this statement, when you press the setup button here, will generate a pulse button. Then we go into the next section, which says called whenever custom pulse parameter is pushed. So if we push this button, which is linked to the minimap, it will run whatever code is down here. And it's mostly the same style of statement. If the parameter name equals pulse, so if the button pulse is pushed, it's a good check. Operator constant free, so this is constant free. The parameter we're changing is value 0. This is value 0. Equals operator LFO2, first channel. So every time we check the button, it will check if we pressed the pulse button, and then it will set the value of channel 0 to whatever the value of the LFO is. So that's sample and hold. It's pretty straightforward. Press the button, it will take whatever this value is and dump it into here. Can be very useful. And also a neat thing is that it's not constantly calling the function like it is with these expressions. These will be on every refresh. This will only happen if you press the button. So it's slightly more CPU friendly. Now you can also do this with a comparator, much like the comparator up here. But now we only check the comparator when a button is pressed. So once again, we have a constant and a threshold. As long as the constant is under the threshold, let's put it here. You press the button. The output will be 0. And if I move above the threshold, the output will be the threshold. And I can also change the threshold, of course. The neat thing is if I change any of these values without hitting the button, nothing will happen. Only when I actually press the button will it update what happens here. It's mostly the same thing. So what we have here is the little bit of code to call for a pulse button, which is once again linked to our MIDI. We are going to check if the pulse button is pressed. And then we're going to check if constant 6, this constant, is bigger or equals the threshold 2. This is the threshold 2. Constant 4, value 0. Constant 4, value 0. will be set to constant 6. That's this constant 6, value 0. In every other situation, the output will be 0. So if I move this down again and I refresh, we're below 19, so now it will output 0. There we go. If we up this and we up this, we're now above 36 and outputs 43. So that's a pulsed comparator. And now we get into the spicy bits, because you can actually make this even a little bit more interesting. And you can actually check if certain settings are met. And you can also do this inside a base, but for this video's sake, we are going to keep it on the same playing field, but I wanted to make some custom parameters. So here we have a few different parameters. And we have a few different ways of activating the parameters. So first off, we have a little button here, which we can turn on and off. If I turn this on and I press my MIDI controller, you will see that this channel 0 will become a 1. If I turn it off and I press the button, it will actually change to 0 again. Underneath we have a drop-down menu, which is currently set to 1. We can change it to 2. It will change the value in the second channel to 2. You can actually turn this into LFO. And now it will become an LFO, which is this LFO. So we can actually control it from here. We can change the playback rate. Or we can change the amplitude. And we have a vert value. And this will update live. So if I change the slider, it will change the constant here. But as you can see, there is no input going into this channel. So this is also done with code. First off, once again, because I'm using a MIDI button, I have some code in the pulse. So I need to make a pulse, which is done with the page.append pulse, opening bracket, single quote pulse, single pulse, closing bracket. Now this is probably not the neatest way to do this, but it's definitely the simplest way to do it. Basically what we're doing is we're checking if the parameter name is pulse. That's to make sure we press the actual pulse button. And then we say if the parameter channel 1 is 1. This is the parameter channel 1. And 1 means on. It will change constant 7, the first channel, which is called channel 0, to 1. If that isn't the case, it will set the value to 0. Then we check the drop-down menu. So we check if parameter channel 2, this is channel 2, is name 1, which happens to be the name of the first value. If you change it here, you will see name 1. It will output a 1. If this isn't the case, else if, elif, check if it is name 2, in which case we will output a 2. If that isn't the case, we're using a else for any other inputs. If someone was to type something here, for instance this, and then we update. We can use operator constant 7 parameter value 1, so that's this value. And instead of just pasting in a value, we're going to paste in an expression, so dot expression equals. And then we want to type in whatever is going to end up in this channel. So in this example, I chose for inserting operator LFO3 channel 0. So this bit of text, if this is set to name 3 and you press the button, is pasted into here. You can actually check this by opening this. You will see operator LFO3 channel 0. So you can actually make references to other parameters as well in this manner, which is pretty cool. Now for the second part, we have something in the onCook. So every time the script cooks, and I'm forcing it to cook by inputting the LFO, that's making sure the script is always cooking. We want to take operator constant 7 parameter value 2. So that's constant 7 parameter value 2 is here. And we want to set it to the base parameter channel 3. And channel 3 is this parameter. So now if I change this parameter, it is pasting it here. And this is pretty fun. So for instance, you can also use this sort of thing to check if certain parameters are activated or not. So if you want to do interface stuff, that's actually pretty interesting. And just for a last one, because this video is already getting pretty long, you can actually use if statements in your parameters as well. So here we have a custom page, and we have an off button. If it's off, this parameter is off. If we turn it on, this parameter turns on. Pretty simple to make. If we go to this base and we go to customize component, we'll go to the second page. And we go to our parameter. And this is pretty much the statement I used in the very first example, but used in a different place. The enable expression is it is 1 if me, meaning in this operator, the parameter on off is 1. Otherwise, it's 0. So this is one way to reference to a operator itself. In this way, you can make parameters that change with each other. So you could actually use this to link two parameters together as well, which is pretty neat. So you only have to change one parameter to change two parameters, for instance. And that's a very, very crash course into some basic logic and scripting if statement stuff in TouchDesigner. Once again, I'm no expert in this stuff, but I had a very hard time finding this stuff out because there's a lot of visual stuff. There's a lot of generative stuff being talked about in the TouchDesigner community. That's the word I'm looking for. But this kind of very straightforward logic stuff is kind of ignored, probably because it's very basic and probably because most people messing around with TouchDesigner are somewhat versed in coding languages. But if you're not, I hope this will somewhat help you. That's it for me today. I'm going to wish you a great day and have a great night.